"Stand him down," the man from the broadcast company said, and he said it the way you'd ask a footman to move a chair. "We need the sentry's spot for the talent. 2 minutes. He can step back behind the column." I'm the captain of the watch at Harrowmere, and in 22 years, no one had ever asked me to take a sentry off the vigil stone the way that man asked me to move furniture. The talent he meant was standing 40 feet away under a ring of lights, a famous face I will not name here because the man's name is the least true thing about him, and the duty he wanted that face to perform was the oldest unbroken act in the house of Harrowmere. So before I tell you how it ended, and it ended with the duty held, and a great many powerful people learning a word they had forgotten, let me tell you what the vigil is, because if you don't understand the duty, you won't understand why one young trooper standing very still on a square of worn stone was about to become the most stubborn thing in the building. Once a year on the eve of the founding, the House of Harrowmere lights the watch lamp. It is a small brass lamp, no taller than a man's forearm, set in a niche above the vigil stone in the inner court. A single sentry stands the stone from dusk until the lamp is lit, and at the appointed moment the senior sentry on the stone takes the taper from the warden's hand and lights the wick himself with his own glove in front of the household. That is all. No music swells. No one applauds. The lamp burns through the night and a relief stands it until dawn. 600 years near enough, the same small flame lit by the same kind of hand, a serving sentries, never guests, never great mans. The lamp is not a prop. The lighting is not a performance. It is the house saying once a year in the plainest possible way, we are still keeping the watch. This year someone had decided the watch needed an audience of 9 million. I had been told a fortnight before that the founding vigil would be covered. Cameras in the inner court, a presenter, a package they called it for the anniversary broadcast, the house opening its doors, the old traditions made warm and accessible. I had no quarrel with cameras. Cameras had stood in that court before, and the lamp had been lit, and the world had been the better for seeing it. What I had not been told, what no one had thought to tell the captain of the watch, was that somewhere between the planning meeting and the eve of the founding, the broadcast had grown a new idea. The idea had a face. The face had a contract. And the contract, it seemed, had been read by people who outranked me and signed by people who had never once stood the stone in the rain. The trooper on the stone that night was a man named Aldous Wren, 26, 3 years on the watch, a year of it at Harrowmere. Quiet, exact, the kind of young soldier who polishes the back of a buckle no one will ever see because the buckle will know. I had put him on the vigil myself, and I had done it for a reason I will come to, because Wren was carrying something that night that none of the broadcast people knew, and that I had told no one, a thing that made the duty for him, not a chore but a debt. He stood the stone from dusk. Bearskin, red tunic, white gloves, rifle at the slope, eyes forward on the dark arch across the court. Behind him the household gathered along the cloister, the warden of the lamp, the steward, the old families, 100 quiet people in good coats who came every year and asked for nothing. And in front of him, where the household's eyes should have been, a forest of black stands had grown. Lights on poles, a camera on a wheeled arm, a man with headphones, and a ring of bright cold light around a single point on the cobbles 4 feet from the vigil stone. That was where the man from the broadcast company found me, at 1:15, with his clipboard and his lanyard and his easy, reasonable voice. "Captain Good, we're nearly there." He didn't look up. "So, the lamp moment, we've reworked it slightly. It'll be much stronger this way, trust me." Our presenter walks in, picks up the taper, lights the lamp, lovely close-up, the whole nation watching the house welcome them in. Very human, very now. Now he looked up and smiled. "So we'll need your man to step off. He can stand back behind the column and shot looks great, very atmospheric, but the talent lights it. That's the moment." I let a breath go by. In the inner court at Harrowmere, a breath is a long time. "The sentry on the stone lights the lamp," I said. "He always has." "Right, traditionally, yes." The man nodded along as if I'd agreed with him. But for the broadcast, obviously, we want the recognizable face doing it. That's the package. It's been cleared. Lord Stannard signed off. He said the name like a key turning. So if you could just have your guy step back, we're tight on time. Lord Stannard was the controller of the household, a real power at Harrowmere, the man who held the purse and the diary and a great many doors. If Stannard had signed off, then somewhere above my head a decision had already been made that the 600th watch lamp would be lit, for the first time, by a hand that had never kept the watch, because that hand was famous and the cameras liked it. I looked past the man, past the lights, to the stone. Wren had not moved. He would not have heard the conversation. He was 20 feet off and trained to hear nothing that was not a threat. But he had felt the light swing toward him, and a soldier feels the difference between being watched and being moved. His jaw was set. His eyes were forward. He was, in the most literal sense, holding his ground, and he did not yet know that someone had just sold the ground out from under him. 2 minutes, the broadcast man said, mistaking my silence for arithmetic. Have him step back and we're golden. Here is the thing I understood in that breath, standing in the cold of the inner court with 100 quiet people behind me and 9 million strangers about to arrive through a lens. I am the captain of the watch. The watch is mine to set and mine to keep. A controller can sign a great many things, but the one thing he cannot sign is the duty off the man who stands it, because the duty does not belong to the diary, or to the broadcast, or to me. It belongs to the stone, and to the long line of men who have stood it, and to the small unbroken promise the flame is supposed to mean. No, I said. The broadcast man blinked. I don't think anyone had said that word to his clipboard in a long time. The sentry lights the lamp, I said again, evenly, and I felt the whole shape of the night turn on those 5 words. That is the duty. The duty is not a photo cameo. If your presenter wants to be in the picture, he is welcome to stand where the household stands and watch a soldier do his job. But the hand on that taper will be the hand that kept the watch tonight. It always has been, and while I am captain, it always will. The lights kept burning. The clock above the arch read 13 minutes to the hour. And somewhere off to my left, a door opened, and Lord Stannard came into the court to find out who had just told his broadcast no. He came across the cobbles fast, the way men come when they expect a room to rearrange itself around them. He was a tall, smooth, careful man, the kind who has spent 30 years being agreed with, and he had the contract folded in one hand like a man holding a winning card. Captain Marlowe. He did not raise his voice. Men like Stannard never need to. There appears to be a hold-up. I'm told you've stopped the broadcast. I've stopped nothing, my lord. The cameras are rolling. The household is gathered. The lamp will be lit on the hour, as it always is. By the presenter. By the sentry. He smiled then, the patient smile of a man who has the room and knows it. Captain, I appreciate the soldierly attachment to the way things are done. I do. But I want you to look at the larger picture for a moment. He turned slightly, taking in the lights, the camera arm, the bright ring on the cobbles, the famous face waiting beyond it with 2 assistants fussing at a collar. Do you have any idea what this broadcast is worth to the house? Not in money, in goodwill. 9 million people, Captain. 9 million who think a place like this is a museum full of cold men in funny hats. And tonight, on the anniversary of the founding, they will watch a face they love and trust walk into the heart of Harrowmere and light a flame, and for 1 minute the whole country will feel let in. That is worth more than 600 years of you and your men standing in the dark where nobody can see you. He let the contract dangle. It's been signed. It's been agreed at the highest level. So I will say this once kindly. Stand your man down. I have been spoken to by powerful men before. The trick they all share is to make the thing they want sound like the only reasonable thing, and to make the man holding the line sound like a sentimentalist clutching a relic. Stannard was very good at it. For about 3 seconds in the cold, I felt the old pull every soldier feels, to be reasonable, to be liked. to let the larger picture win and tell myself it was wisdom. Then I looked at Wren on the stone, and the pull went out of me like water. "My lord," I said, "may I tell you what the lamp is for?" He glanced at the clock. "I know what the lamp is for, Captain." "With respect, I don't think you do, not the part that matters." I kept my voice level because the household was close enough now to hear, and because a man who shouts has already lost the argument he's shouting about. "The lamp isn't a flame, my lord. Anyone can light a flame. A child with a match can light a flame. The lamp is a promise that whatever the world does, however dark it gets, this house keeps its watch. And the promise only means anything because the hand that lights it is the hand that kept the watch. A serving sentry, tired, cold, anonymous. The man nobody sees, that is the whole point of it. The day a famous hand lights that lamp for a camera, the flame still burns, but the promise is gone. You'll have a lovely minute of television and an empty lamp, and you cannot sign the meaning back into it afterward. Not for any money, not for any goodwill." Stannard's smile had thinned. "It's a candle, Captain." "It's a watch, my lord. They're not the same thing, and the difference is my whole trade." Behind him, the broadcast man tapped his watch and mouthed, 11 minutes with the desperation of a man whose schedule is a living thing. The famous face had stopped having his collar fussed and was looking over at us now. The way the talent always looks when the talent senses it is, for once, not the most important thing in the room. "You're refusing a direct instruction from the controller of the household," Stannard said, and the kindness was gone from his voice now. "In front of cameras, on the most important night of the house's year. Do you understand what that means for your career?" "I understand exactly what it means," I said. And I did. I understood that a captain of the watch who tells the controller no on the eve of the founding, with the broadcast tight and the talent waiting, can be a former captain of the watch by morning. I had a daughter at school and a flat that wasn't paid for and 22 years that could be made to look, in the right report, like the stubbornness of a man who couldn't move with the times. "Then stand him down," Stannard said softly, "and we forget this happened." I looked at the stone. I want to be honest about this because it is the heart of the whole night. I did not feel brave. I felt cornered and tired and 49 and very aware of the cold getting into my knees. But there is a kind of decision that isn't about how you feel. It is about what you are for, and a captain of the watch is for the watch. "No, my lord," I said. "Trooper Wren lights the lamp, he kept it. He lights it." And that was when I learned that the broadcast man and Lord Stannard had a second plan, in case the captain proved difficult, because Stannard turned, without another word to me, and walked straight to the stone, to give the order to the young man himself. It is a thing I have seen powerful men do all my life. If the gate won't open, go around it. Stannard could not move me, so he went to the part of the line he thought would be softer, a 26-year-old trooper, 3 years in, who could be reminded who held his career in a folded contract. The controller crossed the lit cobbles and stopped a pace from the vigil stone and looked up at Wren, who stood a head taller in the bearskin and did not so much as flick his eyes down. "Trooper," Stannard said. Pleasant again, now that he was speaking to someone he believed he could fright. "In a moment the presenter is going to come and stand here where you are and light the lamp for the broadcast. When he does, I want you to step back 2 paces and stand at ease against the column. Your captain is being difficult, but you and I are sensible men. You'll do as I say. Nod if you understand." I started forward. A captain does not let his man be worked on alone, but I made myself stop at the edge of the lights, because something in the set of Wren's shoulders told me he did not need rescuing. He needed only to be allowed to be exactly what he was. Wren did not nod. He did not look down. He did not answer, because a sentry on duty does not answer civilians, and a controller in the inner court is, for the purposes of the watch, a civilian. He simply held eyes forward, rifle at the slope, the lamp dark in its niche above him and the clock ticking down behind. The lights blazed on the side of his face and found nothing to film. No flicker, no fear, just a young man being immovable in the place he had been told to keep. I knew why, and Stannard did not, and I think it is time I told you. 3 years before, the man who had stood the founding vigil at Harrowmere was a sergeant named Corwin Wren, Aldous' father. Old watch, 30 years in, the sort of soldier the young ones tell stories about without quite believing them. He had stood the stone the night the great storm came in off the estuary, the night the power failed across the whole county and the inner court went black as a well, and the lamp had blown out, and the regulations said a sentry held his post and waited for the relief. But Sergeant Wren had decided that the one thing a watch lamp must never do on the founding is go dark. So he stood his post and, in the black and the wind, struck a match against his own thumbnail under the shelter of his bearskin, again and again, ruining his gloves and burning his fingers, until the wick caught and held. The household woke the next morning to a lamp that had never gone out, and a sentry whose hands were blistered raw, and no one outside the watch ever heard a word about it, because Corwin Wren did not think keeping a promise was a thing you talked about. He died 18 months ago, quietly the way he'd done everything, and his son had joined the watch the year before that and had asked me, once plainly with no expectation, whether he might one day stand the founding vigil his father had stood. So when the rota came round, I put Aldous Wren on the stone. I did it for the boy and for the father and for the unbroken thing between them. I did not know, when I wrote his name on the rota, that I was setting a son to guard his father's flame against a television crew. But standing in the lights that night, watching him hold while a great lord told him to step aside, I understood that there was no hand in all of Harrowmere, not the famous one, not the controller's, not mine, more entitled to light that lamp than the one that was already on the stone. Stannard did not know any of this. He saw a young man not obeying him, and he reached for the only tool men like him ever carry. "Trooper," he said, and the warmth was gone. "I am the controller of this household. Your contract, your quarters, your pay, your future on this watch, all of it passes across my desk. I am giving you a lawful instruction. Step back, or I will see to it personally that this is the last duty you ever stand at Harrowmere. Do you understand me now?" It was a cruel thing to say to a young man, and an unwise thing to say in front of 100 witnesses and a live camera, though Stannard had forgotten the camera the way angry men forget the very things they came to serve. And Wren, I will remember this as long as I keep my own watch. Wren looked at him for the first time. One slow movement of the eyes, down from the dark arch to the face of the most powerful man in the building. He held it for a moment. And then he looked back up to his front, and he did not move a muscle more, and the meaning of it could not have been plainer if he'd carved it in the stone he stood on. "I am keeping the watch. You may do as you like about the rest." Then Wren spoke. 4 words, the only words he said all night, low and even, the way his father must have said 100 quiet certain things in 30 years. "The sentry lights it." The court had gone very still. The household had drawn close along the cloister, and they had heard the controller's threat and the trooper's answer both. The broadcast man stood frozen with his clipboard against his chest, and the famous face, the talent, the recognizable hand that was meant to be the moment, had come a few steps closer through the lights, and was looking at the young soldier on the stone with an expression I did not expect to see on it. Stannard turned to me, white at the edges now. "Captain, remove this man. Have him relieved and have the presenter ready in." He checked the clock and his voice cracked on it. "In 7 minutes. That is an order." And I have to tell you what I did then, because it is the moment everything turned, though it didn't look like much. I did not argue. I did not raise my voice. I walked out into the lights to the foot of the vigil stone, and I stood beside Trooper Wren, facing the controller of the household, and I put myself between the order and the man. "My lord," I said, "if anyone is to be relieved tonight, it is me. I set this watch. I am responsible for it. The trooper is obeying his captain and his orders, which are lawful and 600 years old, and you may report me for it in the morning. but you will not stand him down. And you cannot relieve him, because there is no one in this household with the authority to take a sentry off the founding stone except the Warden of the lamp, and the Warden has not asked you to. It was the truest thing I knew, and it was also a wall, and Stannard heard it land. The setting of the vigil is not a thing the controller controls. It never has been. The diary is his, the purse is his, the broadcast contract, God help us, was his to sign. But the stone and the lamp and the order of the watch belong to the Warden of the lamp, an old office that survives precisely so that on one night a year a great power cannot simply buy the meaning out of the flame. I had been counting in the cold, on a wall that most people had forgotten was there. The Warden answers to me, Stannard snapped. On the diary, my lord, not on the watch. And from the cloister into the silence an old voice said, he's right. The Warden of the lamp at Harrowmere that year was a man of 81 named Tobias Quill, who had held the office for 19 years and stood the stone himself for 20 before that. He came out of the gathered household slowly, leaning on a stick, in the plain dark coat the wardens wear, and the lights swung to him and he ignored them entirely. He came up beside me at the foot of the stone and looked up at Wren, and then he looked at Stannard, and when he spoke his voice was thin but it carried to the back of the court. My Lord Controller, you signed a contract for a broadcast, good. The cameras may film the vigil as I agreed they might, but you did not have the authority to promise this company the lamp because the lamp was never yours to promise. The lighting of the watch lamp is set by the Warden and has been since before your office existed, and I set it tonight as it has been set every year I have lived. The sentry who keeps the watch lights the lamp. This sentry. He lifted his stick and inched toward Wren. Captain Marlowe has set a good man on the stone, and the good man will light it. There is nothing here for you to stand down. There is a broadcast, Stannard said, and his voice had gone almost pleading now, the powerful man feeling the floor tilt. There is a presenter. There is a country watching. Warden, be reasonable. What does it cost us to let him? It costs us the lamp, the old man said, which is the only thing this house has that cannot be replaced. You may have your cameras, my lord. You may not have our promise. I have stood in a great many silences in 22 years. That one was the deepest. The household had drawn into a close ring now, the old families of Harrowmere, the steward at the front of them in his chain of office, and I watched the thing happen that I will spend the rest of my life trying to describe to younger men. The room chose. Not loudly. No one cheered because we do not cheer. This is not that kind of house. But the steward stepped forward and stood at the warden's shoulder. And behind him, a retired colonel of the watch, here as a guest, came forward and stood at mine. And then, in twos and threes, the household closed up around the vigil stone, not against the cameras, but around the soldier and the lamp, until the bright cold lights of the broadcast were shining on the backs of 100 people who had quietly decided that the watch would be kept the way it had always been kept, and that no contract signed in an office would unkeep it. Stannard looked at the wall of them. He was not a stupid man. A stupid man would have shouted. He understood all at once that he had brought a contract to a place that ran on something a contract cannot buy, and that every minute he stood arguing in the lights was a minute. The camera was recording the controller of the household trying and failing to take a flame from a soldier on the night of the founding. Turn the camera off, he said to the broadcast man low. It's live, the broadcast man whispered back, the color gone out of his face. It's been live for 6 minutes. 9 million people, Stannard had said. 9 million people were, at that moment, watching the most powerful man at Harrowmere lose an argument with an old man, a captain, and a young trooper who had not moved. The clock above the arch read 4 minutes to the hour. And then the famous face, the talent, the recognizable hand that had been brought here to be the moment, did the one thing nobody in that court had planned for. He stepped out of the ring of lights. He came forward through the broadcast stands, past the frozen man with the clipboard, past Stannard, and he stopped a respectful pace from the vigil stone, and he looked up at Ren the way a man looks at a thing he has just understood. I had expected vanity. I had expected him to fight for his minute, the way the powerful fight for everything. What I had not expected was that a man whose whole trade is being looked at would know, when he finally saw it, exactly what he was looking at, and would have the grace to step out of its light. "I didn't know," he said, and he said it to Ren, not to the camera, though the camera caught it and the country heard it. "Nobody told me it was his. I was told I'd be lighting a lamp." He turned to Stannard, and there was an edge in it. "You told me it was a nice piece of theater, my lord. You did not tell me you were taking a 600-year-old duty off a serving soldier to hand it to me as a prop." He shook his head once. "I light enough things for cameras. I'm not going to light this one." And then he did a thing that I will give him credit for to the end of my days. He took 2 steps back, out of the bright ring entirely, and he joined the household. The famous man went and stood with the old families of Harrowmere in the dark at the edge, where the watch is watched from, and he turned his recognizable face up to the stone like everyone else, and he waited to see a soldier do his job. The ring of cold light on the cobbles was empty now. The moment the broadcast had built had simply walked away from it, and the broadcast man, to his lasting credit or perhaps only his survival instinct, did not try to fill it. He looked at the empty ring, and he looked at the soldier on the stone, and very quietly he said to his director through the headset, "Stay on the sentry. Stay on the sentry. This is the shot." And the camera on its long arm swung off the empty mark and came round, slow and reverent, to find Trooper Aldous Wren, who had not moved through any of it. 2 minutes to the hour. The warden of the lamp drew himself up on his stick, and the household stilled, and we did the thing we have done 600 times, the thing the cameras had come to dress up and had instead been taught. I gave the order. My own voice came out steadier than I felt. "Trooper Wren, stand by to light the watch lamp." Wren came to attention with a single clean movement that rang on the stone. The warden took the taper from its bracket, lit it from the steward's small flame, and carried it the 3 slow steps to the foot of the vigil stone, and held it up. And Wren, who had stood that stone since dusk, who had held it against a controller's threat and a broadcast schedule and the most famous hand in the country, who had buried a father 18 months before, who had once lit this very lamp with a match against his own thumbnail in a black and roaring storm. Wren shouldered his rifle, drew off his right glove, and took the taper. He turned to the niche. The court held its breath. 9 million strangers held theirs. And the young man reached up, steady as the stone he stood on, and touched the flame to the wick, and the watch lamp of Harrowmere caught and held and burned, a small, plain, brass-bright flame, the same flame, lit by the same kind of hand it had been lit by for 600 years. No one applauded, we don't. But I heard, along the cloister, the old families let go of the breath they had been holding, all at once, like a tide going out. And that sound, that one quiet exhalation of 100 people who had watched a promise be kept, was worth more than any 9 million claps would have been. Wren drew his glove back on, recovered his rifle to the slope, and resumed the watch. The lamp burned above him. The broadcast cut, somewhere out beyond the lights, to a presenter who had to find words for what had just happened, and by every account I later heard, did it badly, because there are no good words for it. You have to have stood in the cold and watched. That should be the end. The duty was held, the lamp was lit, the meaning was kept. But you'll want to know what it cost, because in my experience nothing this clean is ever free, and you'd be right to ask. It cost me a very bad fortnight. Lord Stannard did exactly what powerful men do. He wrote a report. In it I was insubordinate, I had disrupted a flagship broadcast, I had embarrassed the household, I had put my own sentimentality above the institution's interests, and I should be considered for reassignment away from ceremonial command. It was a well-written report. He was good at those. What he had forgotten, what men who live by the diary always forget, was the camera. The broadcast had gone out live, and the country had not seen an embarrassment. The country had seen a young soldier hold a 600-year-old line against a great lord, and an old warden tell a controller that some things are not his to sell, and a famous man have the grace to step out of the light. The letters came in by the sack. Not to me, to the house. People who had never thought about Harrowmere in their lives wrote to say that they had watched and wept, and that for the first time they understood what the old places were for. The broadcast company, scenting which way the wind blew, recut the whole thing as the centerpiece of their anniversary special, and titled it, without irony, The Keeping of the Watch. It became the most watched thing the house had done in a generation. Stannard's 9 million of goodwill arrived after all, just not in the shape he'd drawn it, and not from the hand he'd chosen. I want to be plain about that fortnight, because young soldiers should know the cost of these things before they decide to pay it. For 2 weeks I did not know whether I would still command the watch. There were meetings I was not in, and the kind of silence in a corridor that tells a man he is being discussed. I went home each night to a daughter who asked how the broadcast had gone, and I told her the lamp had been lit by the right hand, and that was true, and I did not tell her that the man whose desk it had embarrassed could end 22 years with a single memorandum. I had made my peace with it. A man who will only keep the watch when it is safe to keep it is not keeping the watch at all. He is keeping his job and calling it honor. I had decided, at the foot of the stone, which of the two I was. The fortnight was simply the bill arriving. The steward read Stannard's report, and then he read the post, and then he sent for me. I went up the long stair to the steward's room expecting the end of my career, and was offered, instead, the thanks of the household and a chair and a quiet question about whether the order of the founding vigil ought to be written down somewhere more permanent than an old warden's memory, so that no future controller could ever again mistake the lamp for his to give away. I told him what I had told Stannard in the cold, that the lamp is a watch and not a candle, and that the difference is the whole of my trade. He listened the way the best of them do, without hurry, and then he said something I have kept. He said that an institution is not its grand men or its grand contracts. It is the small fidelities its ordinary men keep when no one is checking, and that on the night of the founding the country had been shown one of those fidelities by accident, and had recognized it instantly, because people are starved for it and do not always know the name of what they are starved for. Then he asked me to help write the order down. I said I thought it should be. It now is. There is a line in the standing orders of Harrowmere added that spring that I am told I may take some credit for. The watch lamp on the eve of the founding shall be lit by the serving sentry of the vigil, and by no other hand for any cause, for any cause. The warden insisted on those 3 words. So did I. Lord Stannard kept his office for a time. The purse and the diary are real powers, and the house does not throw such men away over one bad night. But something had shifted, and he knew it, and within the year he had moved on to some grander board in some quieter building, and I do not think he ever quite understood what had beaten him. He thought he had lost an argument about a candle. He had lost an argument about what a house is, and you cannot win that one with a contract, because the house is not the contract. The house is the promise the contract was supposed to serve. As for Trooper Wren, he is Sergeant Wren now. He earned it on his own merits, not on his father's name and not on that night, though I will not pretend that night did him any harm. He stands the founding vigil still, when the rota falls his way, and he lights the lamp with his own bare hand, and the young troopers he trains have all heard, by now, the story of the night the controller tried to take the flame, and the sentry would not give it up. I notice they polish the backs of their buckles. I notice they stand a little straighter on the stone. A promise kept in front of people teaches more than 100 lectures, and Wren taught a good one without saying more than 4 words. People ask me sometimes whether it was really worth a man's career to fight over who held a taper for 30 seconds on one cold night. I understand why they ask. From the outside it looks like a small thing, a old-fashioned thing, a soldier being stubborn about a candle while the modern world waited politely for him to be sensible. But I was there, and I will tell you what I learned, standing in those cold lights at the foot of the vigil stone. The duty is not a photo cameo. It is not a piece of theater to be handed to whoever the cameras love this season. The watch means something only because it is kept by the people whose whole lives are the keeping of it, the tired, the cold, the anonymous, the ones nobody sees. The day we let a famous hand light the lamp for a better picture is the day the lamp goes dark even while it burns. Wren understood that at 26, with 4 words. His father understood it in a storm with a match. And an old warden understood it well enough to put 3 words in a book so that no one could ever forget it again. The lamp still burns every founding, the sentry still lights it. And I still stand my watch, a little older, a little prouder, knowing that for one night I stood beside a young man who would not move, and that between us, a captain, a trooper, an old man with a stick, and 100 quiet people in good coats, we kept the promise the whole place is built on. It was worth it, it is always worth it, that is the watch.